You're a hand therapist, and when you look at the human hand, you see design.
Absolutely. It is perfectly balanced. As a therapist, I see hands when things don't go well, and it's been designed to work beautifully in balance. To me, everything has a reason, everything has a job. To be able to get to that through evolution would mean there'd be a lot of leftover bits that made no sense. It all makes sense. It's all got a reason, it's all got a job. The more I know about the hand, the more I know it was designed by an incredibly intelligent being that wants us to have a beautiful life, preferably with all of our fingers and toes attached.
Why does knowing that your hands are designed and not evolved make such a big difference in your life? My guest today is Dr Anita Clerke, who is a hand therapist who sees the creative designs of God in the human hand. Dr Anita, you've been working in hand therapy and occupational therapy for the last 30 years, and with all this experience, you've seen how the hand shows a designer. Tell me, why do you think the hand is designed and not evolved?
Because it is so beautifully complex, perfectly balanced, and when you look at each tissue and each job that each tissue has, you can tell it's there for a specific reason and purpose.
Fantastic. Well, there's a lot of things I want to ask about. There's so many interesting things about the hand. There's fingerprints, fingernails, the bone structure. I see you've got some interesting props today as well. What are some things that you really want to talk about today?
Right from the tips, from our fingernails to our fingerprints to the tendons that move the fingers, I'm happy to talk about it all. The last 30 years of my career have been devoted to the specialty of hand and upper limb therapy. It seems a bit specific, but the information is changing year by year. It's a really exciting area to be in.
Yeah. So you mentioned hand and upper limb. How far up the limb does that
the
go?
hand therapist should be able to treat injuries all the way from fingernail and fingertip injuries up to shoulder injuries.
Okay, so the whole
arm. Yep.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, let's start with, I'm trying to think of it. I think the fingerprints would be an interesting one to start with, because you hear about them in like crime and law shows and fingerprints and analysis. What's amazing about the fingerprints and how do they point to design?
They're all unique, every single fingerprint. Our left-hand fingerprint is not a mirror image of our right-hand fingerprint, but it is a very similar mirror image. We have different components that make up our fingerprints. So we have whorls, loops and arches. And on the ridges, we have our sweat glands. So you make a fingerprint by the oils that are produced from the ridges.
Right. And that's something I have heard in Hollywood and, movies and things, that you hear of people burning their fingerprints off and things like that. What are your thoughts about that? Does that work? Do you actually change your fingerprints?
I love that about Hollywood. It is so unrealistic. Your skin has 3 layers. You've got the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. So if you just burn off the epidermis, like a blister, your fingerprint will recur within a few weeks. If you burnt so far down to destroy the fingerprint, you would burn right down to the middle of the dermis where we have the nerve endings and the blood supply. That would be really painful. You'd have to be really dedicated to burn your fingerprints off that far. But if you did, you then recover with scar tissue. So you'd have some really unique scars that would be easily identifiable, far more identifiable than searching through thousands of photos of fingerprints.
Right. So if you really went to all the effort to go through the pain to get to the bottom layer of the skin, which would be very painful, you'd actually be very identifiable at the same time.
Absolutely. Yes. Especially Mr. Scarhand.
Wouldn't work too well.
No, the fingerprint experts would pick you out easily.
Yeah. Well, what about the fingernails? What do you see with God's design in the fingernails of the hands?
Without the fingernails, we've got soft endings. If we didn't have the soft endings, our bones would get a lot of pressure areas and problems. So we need the soft ending. But to have a soft, wobbly ending, we couldn't pick things up unless we had virtually an exoskeleton. The fingernails are produced from a nail matrix that is quite a long way proximal to what we see. Where we see the nail start is not the start of the nail. So if you look at where we see the beginning of the nail And our joint, the nail manufacturing matrix, starts about halfway through there. So they're quite long fingernails. And you have keratinocytes that produce keratin, and keratin is like the skeleton left behind, and it gets pushed out in 3 layers. So you can split your fingernails and you know that they're laminated. So it's incredibly complex. They're also well stuck down to the nail bed. So if you're having surgery, you're not allowed to wear nail polish because they will get your fingernails and press to squash the blood supply out for 5 seconds, then look at capillary refill. And so your fingernails are a really good window into the nail bed and the blood supply, the perfusion to your fingers.
Yeah, actually, something that someone like if they're whacking a nail in with a hammer, I've seen this. I think I saw it in a cartoon. I think it was The Simpsons or something. But I think my dad did that once where he whacked his thumb and it ended up falling off and the fingernail. And how does that? So naturally, you said does it normally grows back without any issues, or sometimes do you need to actually do surgery to help it grow back right?
If you crushed your finger and the fingernail's not salvageable, the surgeons will get a piece of plastic or alfoil and put it in to keep that space open between the top skin here and the nail bed whilst the nail starts to regrow. The nail matrix is incredibly durable, and if it's not severely damaged, it will make nail. And even if you've only got a little bit of the nail bed left, it will make nail.
Yeah.
So it's very robust because nails are really useful to protect the end of the fingers. If we didn't have such broad and long nails, when we grip things, the skin would wobble backwards. The fact that they're there means we can grip something with a larger surface area to give really good feedback to our brain about what we're gripping, how firmly we're gripping, whether that thing's slipping or not, whether it's hot or cold.
I hope you're enjoying the interview so far. If you haven't already, like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching.
Actually, that's another thing. So talking about the brain and the feedback, there's I've heard about I think you got an image here, the Homunculus or something, and to explain how the brain is connected to the hands.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that? Because it's one of the most strange pictures I think I've seen.
I know. This is so cool. I call him the Mick Jagger of the brain. The homunculus is a representation of how much space the different parts of our body take up in our brain. So the hands take up a huge amount of space, and the lips and the tongue compared to, say, the back or the legs. There are 241 sensory nerve endings in our fingertips, and that's about 100 times more than there are in a centimetre square on our back. And this fellow actually lays along the brain. Each area of the brain has a specific job. And if we look at this, you see that our homunculus starts off way down here in the middle of the brain. We won't get too technical, but he lies along the brain and down along the outside. And then you'd think the head would be along here. It's actually flipped so that the top of the head is near the hands on the brain. So you've got your motor cortex, your sensory cortex, and your premotor cortex. So when you look at something with the intention of picking it up, your premotor cortex has already planned how to pick it up. You go to reach the object, and within a very small amount of time, it's 268 miles per hour that the large myelinated central nerves will send information up to the brain to go, it's stationary, it's not too hot, it's not too cold, for us to then pick it up. So the information's gone up to the sensory cortex, to the premotor to plan it, more planning into the motor cortex so that I can pick my cup up without dropping it or without overshooting. So it's a really fine, beautiful connection between the hand and the information it gives to the brain and the brain's analysis and the brain's response.
So I'm just trying to think about, I remember in university, I did electrical engineering, and one of the things I was fascinated with was trying to make a biomedical, like a robotic prosthetic hand. And I was thinking about, how can I get started? And I just remember I ended up hitting the wall and not being able to make much progress because I just realized this is so complex to get it right.
Yeah.
I think I ended up getting a sort of like a pincer motion thing going with a sensor. And so my only, if you think of it this way, is the microcontroller was my designed brain. I was trying to sense, how far it's bending so that I don't, get the motors to overbend and overshoot. And then so doing that was a really difficult problem for me. I had to spend a lot of time on that. But there's obviously a lot more than just one flex sensor, from an electrical engineering perspective. I can feel my hand, finger touch my hand at so many different points. Can you tell me a bit about, how we sense things with our hand and all the different parts that we sense?
We've got 3 different sorts of sensory nerves within the nerve bundles. There's large myelinated fibres, and they send information about whether something is still or moving. There's small myelinated fibres that send information about whether something is hot or cold, and they give sharp pain. And then there's our C fibres, which send information a little bit slower. They're unmyelinated, and so the speed of travel is 2 meters per second.
So that's a lot slower than the other 260.
A lot slower than the myelinated fibres. So that when you go to grip something, it takes a moment to realise it's hot. It's literally just a moment though. But those 3 types of sensory nerve fibres build up a picture of whether something is safe to pick up or not.
Yeah.
There's a disease most people know called leprosy, which is known as Hansen's disease. Those people, one of the first symptoms they have is the bacterium attacks their C fibres. So they can still feel things, but they can't feel whether they're hot. So if you're living in an Indian or African culture and you need to sleep by the fire to keep warm, your feet can roll into the fire and you won't feel it.
Yeah.
Or you stand on a tack and you don't look after that wound because you don't feel pain. So the pain fibres are really important. They're there to protect us and to remind us that something's sore. So I think it's a really beautiful design that we have. We don't like pain, but without it we can't protect and rest and heal ourselves. So it's part of our whole healing system.
Right. So even though pain is unpleasant to say the least, it's a protective design mechanism in a way.
Yeah. Without it, you're in big trouble.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and now what happens? So the pain that's sensed through like nerves and stuff, right? Is that yeah?
Yep.
What happens if you actually cut a nerve or something like that? What's the process of healing for that?
Depends on how big a nerve, the little tiny digital nerve. So if you slice your fingertip, as a lot of people do, that will heal by itself. If you slice the nerves further down, they will die off distal to that area. If someone surgically reattaches the 2 endoneural tubes, then after 4 weeks, the nerve knows to grow towards the fingers. They always know which direction.
Yeah.
And you just have to put the 2 neural tubes within 2 centimetres of each other within a tube. If you can imagine a collagen tube or a straw, plug one in one end, one in the other. The proximal part knows to grow to the distal part. It's the only tissue in our body where it only grows proximally. So if you cut your skin, both sides heal together. You damage muscle, both sides heal together. But only with nerves do they heal from the proximal towards the distal.
Yeah.
They're very lovely.
Did they always know about that when trying to fix nerves, about if I get this right, it's like the sheathing of the nerve or the sort of like the casing of the nerve. Did they always know that all you got to do is just fix the casing and the nerves will sort of fix themselves?
The nerves are wonderfully complex. So take our median nerve, for example. The outside of it, there's a collagen tube, the epineurium. Inside that, we've got bundles of nerves, and they come together in another collagen tube, and within that is another one where the axons are. In the past, the surgeons have tried to work out which is the sensory nerve, which is the motor, and put each fascicle together. So there's a lot of suture material there, and it didn't go well. The nerves didn't like it. They'd sprout sidewards. They'd sprout all over the place. It's taken until really recently, as in the last 20 years to think, why don't we put the two ends in a tube and let them do their own thing? Just very exciting. The latest research is put them in tubes. Don't suture them to the tubes. Just put some glue along the outside so you've got minimal nerve disturbance. And then you get really good recovery. The nerve, when it finally gets to its endpoints, gives far better information rather than the information feeling like you're working with gloves on. So this area is developing constantly.
Yeah. So they originally thought, if we need to fix this, we've got to do everything ourselves.
That's right. Join a little bit, tiny bits together.
Yeah.
And now they're like, nope.
The body actually, the nerves actually kind of know where to go. Fantastic. It sounds like, fantastic evidence of design of that. I mean, there's things that we don't, I hear that all the time about things that we think are kind of useless and not super functional, and think, we're just going to have to fix it all ourselves. And then later people realize, hang on, it's actually been designed very well. We don't need to do all that much in it all. I mean, I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, the more we learn about the body and nerves or tendons or bones, the more we realize we don't know. Yeah.
What about bones? So we've got some, now I imagine that's plastic, isn't it? That's not, not real bones. How do bones heal in the hand?
Bones heal through an incredibly complex system. If you break your distal radius and they plate and screw it, you'll actually heal with a different bone pattern than if you're put in a plaster. Because when you put in a plaster, you create callus because of the slightly micro movements you do within the plaster. If the fracture is not stable, you have to have surgery. But if it is stable, you'll form a very strong bone union just by your own body.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. So if things aren't broken so badly that they need to be kind of held in position for long enough to reattach, do the bones reattach, or do you actually have to kind of fix them together?
You just have to hold them near enough, just like the nerves. You hold them near enough, and bone cells migrate across the area. It's an extraordinary complex system. Even the skin of the bone, the periosteum, it has many roles in stimulating bone cells to create bone. It's so complex that every time I read more about it and refresh my memory, I'm amazed at the complexity, the amount of growth factors involved, what we can use and what we can't use. They've tried bone cement, artificial cement. They've tried bone from cows and pigs. That's been processed and sterilised. The body won't reject it.
Yep.
But the best bone to use is our own. So often if you've got a fracture to the arm or a distal radius fracture or ulnar fracture with a large bone deficit, they'll take a cork of bone from your iliac crest and place it in the area to help stimulate bone growth. And that is a incredibly complex job. It seems really easy, but it's extraordinary to think you can take cancellous bone from one area to place in another to help that area grow bone the way it should grow. It knows which way to grow it and which shape to make it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it needs just a little bit of help from somewhere else.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. And I got so many questions about the hand. The other thing I've heard a lot about, I don't know if this is to do with the bones, but I often hear people have carpal tunnel syndrome. Is that what it's called? Yep. Can you talk about carpal tunnel syndrome?
Sure. So these 8 little bones here, they've all got a different function and they make up the carpal bones. If you look at them from my point of view, they're slightly concave. If you imagine that my finger is 9 tendons and the median nerve that go through the carpal tunnel, there's a transverse carpal ligament on top. When there's lots of swelling in the area, we wake up with pins and needles at night, give a hand a good shake, go back to sleep.
I felt that before.
So what they do in carpal tunnel surgery is actually cut this ligament. It regrows, but once it's cut, it gives the area less pressure, and then the therapist will help people learn how to mobilize the median nerve through the area as that ligament regrows in hopefully a slightly bigger fashion than it did before.
Yeah.
So you can see the tunnel nicely. Just to the side of it is another tunnel called Guillon's canal where the ulnar nerve goes. So this little hook here is the hook of the hamate, and the ulnar nerve winds around it And the pisiform, this little bone here, is part of the edge of the tunnel where this little nerve goes. Now, you know if you hit the ulnar nerve, because if you use the heel of your hand as a hammer, as a lot of fellows like to do.
Like this bit on the side?
That bit's the pisiform.
It's quite hard.
It's quite hard, but it's not used. It shouldn't be used for hammering. You'll find you'll get tingling up along here. Or if you haven't been mountain biking for a very long time and you're going to decide to do a whole weekend of mountain bike riding.
I think I've felt that.
Yeah.
I think, Is that along here you get
that's
sort of
along there. Yeah. You can really cause a lot of reversible compression of typically the ulnar nerve through here, because the bike handle just comes over where that ulnar nerve is, just distal usually to the hook of the hamate.
Yeah.
So that's your median nerve and your ulnar nerve. And just to complete the set, we have the radial nerve that innervates all the muscles and some of the skin on the back of the hand.
Right. Okay.
So it's the 3 nerves.
Yeah. One thing something that's fascinating, because I've never looked at a hand skeleton before. I mean, I've always had my skin on.
Good to know.
But to see a model like this, the just even like the little lumps and how they fit just right for the the tendons and the nerves to fit in. That's fascinating. Yeah.
There's been a lot of research on the carpal bones. This week alone, there was the Queensland Hand Surgical Society annual meeting up in Noosa. I didn't go, but I was looking at some of the slides, and again, they're trying to work out how to repair the ligaments when the ligaments between these bones break. So a ligament, its job's to keep 2 bones together. There's lots of ligaments here, and they allow the bones to move not only up and down, but these 8 little bones to move in a ring fashion as well as in a column fashion. So they all have slight movement and they all have slightly different jobs. And to try to recreate how the ligaments allow the bones to move and keep them stable is really difficult. So the world leading hand surgeon in carpal kinematics, a fellow called Garcia Elias over in Barcelona, said at our conference a few years ago, he said, everything I told you 10 years ago is wrong.
Right.
And everything I tell you now will all be wrong in 10 years. Because the more we understand about even just this little area of the body, the more we're amazed.
Right.
The scaphoid doesn't just move up and down, it moves side to side, and it moves in a diagonal plane. That's just one of the bones.
Right.
And it has an effect on all the others, and all the others have an effect on it.
So they're discovering a lot more functionality or multifunctionality for things that are in the hand.
And how hard it is to repair it.
Yeah.
So if you fall down on your wrist, you may bust your distal radius. Everyone knows someone who's had a distal radius fracture. The next most commonly injured bone is the scaphoid. If you've gone down hard enough that you've caused some injury, not broken the scaphoid, but broken the ligament between the scaphoid and the lunate, it's really difficult to repair that because that ligament also impacts all the others around it.
Yeah.
And that ligament has 3 parts. It has a dorsal part, a central part, and a volar part. And depending on which part you break, the dynamics of how these move will change.
Right. So if you've had that sort of injury, there might be some movements of your hands that you have less flexibility or less range. Or
You'll tend to find it's hard to push up on that. So to weight bear on it becomes really painful.
Yeah.
Or to use tools can become really painful. So to have pain there is quite a game changer for any manual worker. Occasionally they take a tendon called palmaris longus to recreate that ligament by drilling a hole through the scaphoid into the lunate, and they wrap it around the back in a very fancy manner. But that really hasn't fully recreated the biodynamics in the hand.
Yeah.
So they're still working on how to get it all to cooperate.
Yeah.
That particular tendon is an interesting one because not all of us have it.
Right.
So that's called palmaris longus. It's not always used because it's a fairly thin, long tendon, but when we do have it, it can be used as a substitute for ligaments that are broken or for a pulley.
Is that what they call a sacrificial tendon?
Yes.
Is that because I've heard of that as an evolution argument, and people will say that it's like a evolutionary leftover, and that's why we can use it for surgery because not everyone has it, and we can take it, and it's like, oh, it's fine without it. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
It is useful. Just because everyone doesn't have it doesn't mean that we've evolved to not have it. It's like saying not everyone has exactly the same look on the outside. We don't always have exactly the same look on the inside. And depending on which research you read, 8%, 10%, 15% of people don't have palmaris longus, or they don't have it on one hand and they have it on another hand.
Yep.
So see, with you've got it's really easy. So you take your ring finger down and
Okay.
you put your thumb over it
Yep.
and you pull your wrist up and you'll see quite clearly mine sticking out
Yep.
here.
Yep.
Next to it is flexor carpi radialis and flexor carpi ulnaris. And I've also got it quite clearly. You can see it on the other side. But let's test your hands.
You sort of got two. So that's,
So you've got it here quite nicely on you. But what about your other hand?
let's have a look.
So interesting, you don't have it on this one.
Oh,
So you're one of those people who unilaterally
Yep.
don't have that tendon.
yeah. And what's the, so like in terms of function, so again, like the evolutionists, they'll say, oh, it's useless. What's the, why is it useful, you're saying, to actually have it?
Because it goes into part of the palmar fascia. So when you draw your hand up in this position, it helps to stabilize the base of the hand. So you can grip something firmly and not have whatever you're gripping wobble from beneath you.
Ah, yep.
But you obviously didn't even know you didn't even have one, and you haven't felt that you could lift less in your left hand than your right hand, or
Yep.
left in your right hand, that's the one that's absent.
Yep.
You wouldn't even know. And your grip strength is probably pretty similar.
Is that because other parts of my hand would compensate for that,
Yes.
for not having it?
Yeah, and they would have from birth.
Okay, right. So it's optimal and ideal to have everything,
Yes.
but the body again it's got enough ways to compensate for things when it's only like a little thing missing,
Yes.
rather than
Yeah. They've done lots of studies on does it affect grip strength. And so it's a great study for undergraduate med students to run around and do this and see who's got one, who hasn't, and then measure everyone's grip strength.
Yep.
Some Indian fellows did that a few years ago. Some undergraduates, they got 240 of their mates, half of them female, half of them male, assessed who had palmaris longus, who didn't. They found that 92.5% of people had palmaris longus. Some of the women didn't, some of the men didn't. But if you evened all that out with their grip strength, you could not determine who had palmaris longus and who didn't by the grip strength.
Right. So that compensation overpowered the difference
Yes.
of like working out if you had it or not. Yeah. Okay.
I hope you're enjoying this interview so far. Creating content like this takes a considerable amount of time, effort, and resources. We're passionate about getting this message out, and we want to keep bringing you more videos like this one. But here's the thing, we need your help to make this happen. Your support, no matter how big or small, will help us cover our production costs and enable us to continue creating impactful content. To support this project, just use the link in the description below or the on-screen prompt. We're so thankful for your support.
I mean, that was really cool to be able to actually do a test to see if I had are there any other things like that sacrificial tendon that some people have and some don't?
Some people have a tendon called a flexor digitorum superficialis that's either absent or tethered. So it has one common muscle belly and it becomes 4 tendons before the carpal tunnel and splits and inserts, I can show you on this guy here, inserts in our middle phalanx of each finger. To test whether you've got it, you hold all the other fingers straight and pull that one up. And you do your middle finger, it's nice and cool.
Yep.
And then you go to your ring finger, it's all good. And then if you go to your little finger, you've got it on that side, as have I. We go over the other side, index finger's fine, got it on the middle. I've got it on my ring, but I come to my little one.
Oh, so you
It's
can't
either-
bend it.
No, so it's either absent or mine's tethered to my ring finger.
Oh, okay.
Now, if I was a concert pianist or I needed them to work independently at the PIP joint level,
Yeah.
maybe I'd have surgery to get those two split,
Yeah, right.
but I'm not. And so I wouldn't even know that I had that. It's a bit of a disadvantage unless I went and tested myself. And that's just part of normal variation. It's
Right.
like, why does Ian Thorpe have size 17 feet? It gives an advantage in the pool.
It's great for for swimming, but you might trip over the doorstep a few times.
That's right.
With
So
big
we
feet.
all look a bit different. We all have plus or minus a few bits,
Yep.
but we're still all human. It doesn't make you and me more or less because one tendon's tethered or one is absent.
Yeah, but like you said, still, if you do have those tendons there, if you're doing something very specific like playing an instrument which requires, is articulation the right word?
Because
Or
articulation,
movement?
yeah.
Articulation.
Requires fine individual controlled movement. So when my little finger moves down, I can't move it without my ring finger. So that could be a bit of a deficit depending
Yeah.
on what instrument I play. I don't play a string instrument.
So it goes to show that there's still a functionality for it.
Oh, yeah.
It's not useless,
No.
but it's not the end of the world if you
No.
don't have it. It's
No.
your body compensates very well,
Yes.
even though there are some specific things where you won't be able to use it, showing it does have function.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like saying we don't need all 10 fingers. Well, we don't, but pick one to not have. There was in Brisbane quite a few years ago, some people that tortured a bartender to get some information and they started hacking off his fingers.
Oh, yeah.
He was a muso. It was quite awful. So how many fingers could a muso do without? The thumb? No, thumb's really useful for opposition. The little finger, well, that's out the side. No, you use that for your handspan if you play the piano. What about middle finger? Well, that's really useful. It's our longest one. Index finger, thumb, and middle finger are used for a lot of precision work.
Yeah.
So, if I had a bully say to me, which finger would you like to lose? I'd probably nominate my ring finger.
Yeah.
But without my ring finger, change is going to fall out of my hand when I ask for change.
Yeah.
I'm going to have problems trying to wash my face and cut my hand.
Yeah.
You have to also get rid of the ray there as well. And then I'd have a smaller span. So it's all of use and it's all beautifully balanced, but we can do without them.
Yeah.
That fellow was on Australia's Story, if people who want to look that up.
Yeah.
And he went back to playing the clarinet. And that's a lovely story because there was a Sydney instrument maker who heard about this fellow and redesigned the levers on a clarinet so that fellow could graduate.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so we can compensate, although having all 10 is the best.
So that makes a lot of sense that there's full functionality and that's useful for many things. It's not evolutionary leftovers. There's all sorts of things that are useful and have function. But when we have things removed or we have to amputate or things like that, sometimes it's the best situation, given what circumstances we've got. But it doesn't mean it's fully optimal, even though we can live without it. So that makes a lot more sense to me. Yeah. Now, one thing I did want to talk about is right and left-handedness, because I think it's a fascinating thing. I remember I can't remember if I mentioned this before, but like in primary school, I used to remember there'd be scissors and most of the scissors had blue handles and some of them had green handles. And I always thought, why are they different colours? And someone told me, right-handed and left-handed scissors. And so what do you know about right and left-handedness and how does that work with the brain as well?
Most of us have a preference for one hand over the other for complex tasks. So if you take the general people and the general concept of handedness, 90% of us are right-handed and 10% are left-handed. But it depends on how you define handedness. If you define as which hand we write with, you'll find everyone from about 1970 backwards all write with their right hand, whether they're left or right-handed. So handedness is an interesting concept where you look at it within the context of the community or the society you live in. So in India, you always eat with your right hand.
Yeah.
Because you toilet with your left hand.
Yeah.
So to say if someone's left or right-handed is fairly complex. We can be right-handed for most tasks or left-handed for most tasks or maybe a bit mixed-handed. My patients would often say to me, I'm not right-handed for everything. I do this with my left hand. Left-handed people are quite standout people too. They're really interesting.
Yeah.
So no matter how you measure it, they're somewhere between 5 and 15% of the population.
Yep. Are left-handed.
Are left-handed.
Left-handed, okay.
Since World War II, America's had 14 presidents. 5 of the last 7 have been left-handed.
Oh, right.
So Gerald Ford, Reagan, we got to talk about Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, Obama, they've all been left-handed. Reagan writes with his right hand, but he was born in the era where everyone was made to write with their right hand. So
Okay.
my mother is left-handed. She writes with the right hand, does everything else with her left hand. So is she left-handed or right-handed? If you did a handedness inventory, she would come out as strongly left-handed. If you did a handedness inventory for me, I'm strongly right-handed. Except if you ask me which hand I crochet with, I'm left-handed, because who taught me? My left-handed mother.
Of course.
So handedness can be mixed to be ambidextrous is something different.
Yep.
If you're ambidextrous, it's usually for a specific skill. So when I was
Right.
doing the Ph.D, I was assessing people's handedness because we're pairing that up with the grip strength to see whether there was a difference in left-handers and right-handers.
Yeah.
We're asking people which hand they wrote with. Now, usually we all just pick one hand.
Yeah.
This particular lady, she said, well, do you mean writing on the board or writing on paper? And I thought, oh, she's just being a bit clever.
Yep.
And I said, well, explain it to me. And she said, well, I'm left-handed. But when I learnt, when I became a teacher, I had to write on the blackboard, it would just smudge.
Yeah.
She said, so I taught myself to write on the blackboard with my right hand, but when I write on paper, I write with my left. So that is a truly ambidextrous person for writing.
Yeah, yeah. That'd take a... I mean, so if they've... Does that mean they'd have genes to, like, a genetic advantage to be able to learn how to use their left hand as well? Like, are they genetically ambidextrous? Or is ambidextrous just something that you actually train yourself to be?
It's usually something you train yourself to be, and it's usually just for one or two skills. So although that lady could write on the blackboard with her right hand,
Yeah.
most things she preferred to do with her left hand.
And that's the genetic side
And that's the
of
genetic
things.
side, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
It's not strongly genetic because if you think only 5 to 15% of the population are left-handed, it's a pretty small percentage.
Yeah.
I'm one of 6. My mother's left-handed. I have one sibling that's left-handed.
Yep.
So if you have a left-handed parent and a right-handed parent, you're not going to get 50% left or right-handed. We're mostly
Okay.
right-handed
Yep.
for most tasks that require dexterity. But if you're a tradie and you work in confined spaces, you'll be just as good with your left as with your right with the tools you use in that confined space because
Yeah.
you've trained yourself that way.
Yeah, yep.
Because our brains are set up so that 95% of us that are right-handed or prefer our right hand for dexterous and complex tasks have most of our language centered on the left side of the brain.
Right. Okay.
Seven-
Hang on. Correct. I got to not say right.
Yeah,
Go on.
left
Yeah,
side
yep.
of the brain. And 70% of left-handers also have the language centers on the left side. So
Okay.
they're not all the same mirror image that we would think, oh, if you're left-handed, you'd be right brain dominant, if you're right-handed. No.
I've heard that where people so is that that's not always the case that if you're right-handed, it's like it's the opposite side of the brain.
So if you're right-handed, 95% of you will have the left side of your brain dominant for language.
Yeah.
Although language does spark around all different areas. But Broca's area, some of the key areas for language will be on the left. If you're left-handed, you're not necessarily going to be right-sided for language.
Oh, right. Okay. I keep saying right. Interesting. Yeah. So it's not like if you're left-handed, you have to fit the brain language connection people usually associated with people with right-handedness.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So, and are there any other things, like with the brain connection and left and right-handedness that you find interesting?
The left and the right side of the brain always talk to each other. The left and the right hand have to know what they're doing. The left and right side of the brain do. Because in the middle of the brain is a huge superhighway of fibers, the corpus callosum, that send information at phenomenal speeds from one side to the other. So the whole idea of, being artistic and learning to use your right brain more, as soon as you open both eyes, information, or even one eye, information is going both sides of the brain. It is all interconnected. We really can't do without them communicating.
Yeah. Now, what about, this makes me think about the presidents. And you mentioned that like a lot of these presidents were left-handed. Do you think that's something, like reflects something to do with, again, like you're saying, just because someone's left-handed doesn't mean they've got that different language capacity thing. Like it can be either. But could that be a connection there? Like that left-handed people have got more innovation or more like, I don't know, ability to be a president, like whatever those characteristics are?
Well, they are really standout. Left-handed people are fascinating. A lot of actors that you'd know are left-handed. Tina Fey, Lady Gaga, Keanu Reeves, Julia Roberts, Prince William. So there's a lot of really stand-up people in the world that are left-handed.
Yeah.
So they really are quite special. And there was a lot of ridiculous controversy a while ago about, if you're left-handed, it's because you've got brain damage. That's an insult. Some people are just wired differently to other people. That's okay.
Yeah.
It's like with the nerves to the hand. Not everyone has exactly the same sensory nerve distribution. We have the same common theme, but we're not all the same. That would be boring.
Yeah, yeah. And with the left and right-handedness, that's not... So I remember when you're talking about the tendons, it's like your body's great at compensating if you don't have it. So you won't notice the grip strength difference. But or like that other tendon that you're talking about for like the musician, it does affect them for their specific task. So the full functionality means that they can play their instrument a bit better. So it's like having the tendon is like the optimal scenario.
Yes.
But the right-handed and left-handedness, is that an optimal thing that, natural selection is working on to, make everyone, like the right-handed people, survive more? Or is that not really that sort of thing?
Not really that sort of thing, no.
Right. So,
No, there was lots of rumours about left-handed people have more injuries, they die younger. When they looked into it and worked out, what defines left-handedness, they realised that was dreadful research.
yeah.
So no, left-handers survive just as well as right-handers. And they're really standout creative leaders. So maybe they actually have something a little bit special in the fact that some of them are wired slightly differently.
Yeah.
Maybe that makes them more creative, better problem solvers, better diplomats.
Yeah. And I guess when you got that diversity of people with different strengths in there, thought that works well together.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily one out competes the other.
Yeah.
And that it's all works together.
It's all complementary.
Yeah. Fantastic. Now, so you're Dr. Anita Clerke. What was your research was it to do with hands?
Yes. It was to do with grip strength and whether your left or right hand was stronger, and it was to do with repeatability. And I did teenagers who aren't particularly reliable or repeatable or anything. I was looking at whether 13 and 14-year-old teenagers could repeat the same grip strength a week or 4 weeks later compared to 17-year-olds. And we assessed males and females, and therefore also got some grip strength norms for those age groups, which hadn't been done before. So I also needed to look into handedness and make some comments on left and right-handedness, and looked at whether they had hand injuries, look at the shape of their hands, because there's one very commonly used grip strength tool that disadvantages mainly girls with little square-shaped hands. They can't grip it as well. So we did the bias of the tools.
Is that the one that's like a coiled spring? It's like two bits of metal and a spring in the middle?
No, that's
Not
more
that
of a strength trainer.
Oh, okay. I've seen
So there's
that
one called a JMR dynamometer. They're all called JMRs now.
So it's a more technical...
Yeah, it's a more technical one. Yeah, it's
measurement.
a hydraulic one.
Okay.
Sometimes it's electronic.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
So it was about all of those aspects.
Yeah, and during your PhD, I mean, this is something I've heard people going through their PhD, and if they're a Christian, especially a creationist, and they're in a field of biology in particular, or geology or astronomy, they do face a bit of pushback. How did that go for you? Were you a Christian when you did your PhD? And
Yes, I was a Christian by then. First time around uni, I wasn't.
Yeah.
That's a very long story for another podcast, I think. But I went through doing the PhD just by research. There was no coursework. So I didn't need to sit through and write exams saying, I know this is the answer you guys want, so I'm going to give it to you. But when you do a PhD, you've got to do lots of minor topics. And one of the topics that the statistician suggested was, why don't you do a chapter on the evolution of the hand? And I said, I'm sorry, but I can't. This is several years into the PhD. And we got along okay.
Yeah.
Maths is not my strong point, so I really relied on the statistician a lot.
Yeah.
But I said, no, can't do that. And he's like, why not? I'm like, well, I don't believe we evolved. To which he sighed and he said, all right. And he said, you're a flat earther. I'm like, no. But, I believe in natural selection. I just don't think we evolved. He's like, okay. He said, don't mention design in your PhD. Don't say it, you won't pass. Just leave it out.
Wow.
He said, get your PhD and then you can talk about design however you like. So here I am now.
Yeah.
So I did that. Instead of doing a chapter on the evolution of the hand, I did a chapter on the development of grip strength tools and the history of measuring grip strength.
Yeah.
As a fairly dry chapter, but, we needed the extra chapters. But at the end of the PhD, I took him out for dinner and the other supervisor.
Yeah.
And so we had a professional relationship.
Yeah.
I gave him a creation book. I don't know whether he ever read it, but the relationship stayed. And then years later, I wanted to publish some other research and contacted him and said, will you be involved? And he said, yes, he would. So the relationship stayed respectful, although I had some clear limits and he was respectful of that. So it went fine.
That's really interesting to know because sometimes I hear people going into university and even PhD study like you did, and it can be really hostile. And then sometimes it's like, when I did my PhD, my science area was, it was more physics-based, coastal research. So the evolution thing didn't really come up. I had one professor who did sort of have a go at me at being a flat earther or something like that in a friendly way. It was great, but there was no real major hostility. But then some people for yourself, you had to actually say that I can't do this chapter. But you still maintained that respectful relationship, and that's fantastic. That's just, I think that's such a good example for how we should approach, not trying to just knock the door down when we go to university and be like, all right, I'm going to debate all the professors, but also not compromising at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, about evolution, you're talking about your professor who obviously wanted a chapter on evolution, and I'm guessing that they probably wanted something mentioned about homology, which is something I've heard of where it's like a textbook thing that they teach about evolution where the forearm and hand, or this is a good example, it's right there, it's got the same bone structure, but just the bones are different sizes for different animals and even some birds and, marine creatures. And it's sort of, people like to say, it's evidence that we all have a common ancestor because we've all got the same forearm structure. What do you think about that?
I would say to that, it's a really good design. It's been designed to use a hammer, to stroke a baby to sleep, to be able to feel 3 to 5 micron thick scratches in a pane of glass. It's beautifully designed. And so why not use a similar design and other creatures? You look at monkeys that swing and need a good grasp. You need to get a thumb opposable to hang on to those branches.
Yeah.
So I have no problem in seeing similarities in other species.
Right. So the similar features don't point to a common ancestor, point to a common designer.
Absolutely.
Instead.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that even when you talked about some of the unique, or just the real specific fine details of the ligaments and things, I imagine that's a bit, if we just think about the bones, we're missing a lot of other very, unique and well-designed things that are different to other creatures as well.
Yes. Yeah, it's a perfectly balanced design. And we've got a gap here. It's designed so we can go to the side. That's where we can do our hammering or our writing. So the design is beautiful. So why not allow other creatures to also have the ability to take their forefoot to the side? I see no problem in having something similar throughout different creatures.
Right.
It's just signs to me that the designer has found a good design and used it in different ways in different creatures.
So to summarize, why does knowing that your hands are designed and not evolved make such a big difference in your life?
Because to me, it's just reassurance that there is a bigger plan than me, someone who was more creative and wants us to have a life of not just survival, but of being able to create art, music, and do so many other things. And the more I know about the hand, the more complex it is, the more I know I don't know, the more I know it was designed by an incredibly intelligent being that wants us to have a beautiful life, preferably with all of our fingers and toes attached.
That's so wonderful to hear about, just how much a difference it makes in your life to know that you're created by a wonderful God. Now, we've actually got a magazine, Creation Magazine, which has lots of more information about biology, astronomy, geology, all sorts of these topics, which people think contradict with the Bible. But when you actually look at the science properly, you realise that it just paints a wonderful picture of science working with the Bible in the timeline. So can you talk a little bit about Creation Magazine and why you found it helpful for yourself?
I really like reading it over breakfast because the articles are short and I always get something out of it. The articles I like the most are ones where some engineer has taken the design of something within nature and it's helped them make something. For example, I was reading a while ago about the person that designed the head of the bullet train took the design from one of the birds of prey. And I thought, that is so cool that we can realise how meaningful design is within nature to then help us with design in things that make our lives easier or better.
Fantastic. Sounds like I have to look at article up on creation.com too. I haven't read that one.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
There was one about, in a recent edition, about the elephant's ability to pinch with its nose, and that, of course, sparked my interest. And it can pinch with more of a pinch force than people can. And I just love the idea of, why not make the elephant have this cool ability to pinch things up with its trunk?
Yeah, it's like a hand in the nose.
Yeah, it is. The way it moves and sniffs and that, you think it is like a hand with a nose on it.
Very well
and
designed.
I love that sort of, why not do that?
Yeah.
God had a great sense of humour when he made things. And those creation articles just really bring out some of that amazing, why didn't I think of that? Why have the zebras got stripes and different patterns? Why do they always have to be the same? They don't. It just reminds me of the diversity and what fun the diversity is. Even in camouflage, there's been some great articles on camouflage. Like, why do some have spots and some have stripes? Well, just because God decided that would be a really good idea. So it's been a great magazine to look at.
Fantastic. Well, if people are really keen to get the magazine, we'll have a link in the description below. They can click on the link and that's a way they can sign up for the magazine. I think there's 4 issues every year, so you get them fairly regularly too.
We do, and there's enough to keep me going for multiple breakfasts for each edition, so I enjoy that.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for being here on the podcast. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honour.